Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to thank you for joining us today for our Identifying Standards and Creating Smart Goals, the second webinar in our 5-webinar series on PLCs. This is your team today. I'm Lauren Mercier from Demonstrated Success, and I will be facilitating today. Heather Jenkins is on the call today from Demonstrated Success. She will be your presenter. We also have Annie Wallace from the Department of Education. She is the math consultant.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Annie. And Jenny Cavalieri is also on the call, and she is your ELA consultant from the state.
Hi, everybody.
We'd like to thank the Department of Education. We work very closely with them to provide a lot of webinars and workshops and information for you. This is the second of 5 webinars in our PLC series. Just a reminder that in this webinar format, everybody is muted and your cameras are off. We definitely encourage you to ask questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature here. And then I will get those questions. There'll be some times where we'll break and we'll have an opportunity to ask those questions. If you have information for the whole group to see, you're welcome to use the chat. Tomorrow during the day, we'll send you a link with your PD certificate for attending today, a video of this webinar, PowerPoints, and all the other handouts that Heather has prepared for you today.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everybody again for coming today. I know that PLC is a really big topic that has been really on the forefront of what a lot of schools are doing. So we do appreciate your time today. Like Lauren said, it is the second in our webinar series here. So the first part of our presentation will be a little bit of a review of PLC. And then we're going to really dive into understanding standards, articulating SMART goals, and then any other question and answer. At this time, I am going to turn my camera off and we'll just get started with our overview of PLC. So just to review some of the topics we have, I feel like this is what schools look like right now. Our teachers are buried in every piece of data that you can imagine. They have lesson plans everywhere and everything is really hard to manage. We also have this sort of race against the clock to be able to get all of these things in. So PLC is really starting to get us to hone in and be able to sift through a lot of this particular data that we have and work that we're doing to be able to focus on how we improve learning for students. So the 3 big ideas of PLC are ensuring that students learn, number 1. We also want to make sure that we are fostering a culture of collaboration. We talked about that a lot in our first webinar when we talked about effective teams and being able to collaborate with our team members. So we want to make sure that that's on the forefront. And we also want to make sure that we're focusing on results. When we're talking about ensuring that students learn, this is not anything that's new to anybody, but we know that the shift has been from here we taught it, that's what we're doing, they should know it, to we need to not only teach it, but we need to ensure that all students are learning, right? It's not enough to teach, we need to make sure the learning is also taking place. That culture of collaboration that we're talking about is that systematic process of creating effective teams and working together, not just on our islands in our classrooms, but together with our whole teams. And we're making sure that we're analyzing and looking at data and everything that we're doing in our teaching to improve student learning. That collaborative culture also needs to, for some people, they need to shift from, well, those are my students, or, oh, those are your students, or, oh, those are special ed, or those are Title I, or I don't have those students in my classroom all the time. We have to shift that thinking and make sure that we're really of the philosophy that the students are the responsibility of the entire school, not just your classroom or not just your grade level necessarily. They're everybody's responsibility. Also, we need to really start looking at for ourselves and our colleagues, and knowing that this growth mindset is really in that sort of forefront of our thinking as well, and making sure that we have opportunities for professional growth. We all are doing the best we can. We all are doing what we feel like is right by our students, but there's always room for improvement. And we kind of need to leave those egos aside that say we do everything the way we need to be doing it and there's no needing to change, and just knowing that there's always room for improvement. And making sure that we are including all people in our contributions to making that work better and student learning improving. This next part about focusing on results, a lot of times when we're teaching, we go with our gut, and our gut is usually right. But this process and what we're really going to be looking at is how does that data improve improve our instruction, or how does it change our instruction? What are we seeing there that helps us pinpoint those things that we can tweak or add to our instruction to really hone in on that student learning? So we're really going to be focusing on results and the data. We have 4 driving questions for PLC. And these are repeated all the time. Anytime you think of PLC, think of these 4 questions. What do we want our students to learn? How will we know when they've learned it? What will we do when they haven't learned it? And what will we do when they have? If those questions aren't being answered for in any way in your meetings, then they're not going to technically be PLC meetings, right? We have, our schools have sort of adopted PLC as an acronym, or professional learning communities, for every team meeting. It doesn't mean that you don't have team meetings. It's just usually the way that we look at it, it's not a PLC unless one of these particular questions is being answered. Again, PLC is a whole school community. So it's not just your specific grade level teachers working together, but it's that vertical dialogue that you have between grade levels, and making sure that you're collaborating between grade levels so that you know that each grade level is doing their part to make sure that our collective and shared goals are being met. So everybody has a shared purpose or a vision. We all are committed to making sure that we're achieving that particular goal or that vision, and that each grade level has its own part of that. As we're reviewing PLC and we talk about educators or learning or students in general, John Hattie is one of the people on the forefront of checking and looking at what are the biggest educational influences on student learning. So we did a lot of studies on different influences on student learning and what really affected student learning more than others. And he ranked the successes of those. His goal in mind is that he was looking at what influences were most sort of, were the most, I can't even think, I'm missing the word, but it's looking at a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of work. So I am a teacher. I am having the students for a year work on all of these skills. And our goal is obviously a year's worth of growth for that. It doesn't always happen, but we want to make sure. So these indicators are feeding into that. So here's the Hattie effect. These zones are, these particular things have a negative or reverse effect on learning. And as we go up through, they start to have more of an effect on learning and the positive effect on learning, right? These are negative effects on learning. These are positive. So he saw that suspensions or expelling students, obviously lack of sleep, kids are not going, it has a reverse effect on learning. If kids are bored in a classroom, it's not going to, deepen their learning. But as we go all the way through here, what he found was had the most desired effect on student learning is that collective teacher efficacy. That's teachers working together to create an environment where it is a common goal to achieve student learning. So just to kind of review that and make sure you understand that, again, this working together, we know this is not new. We know that we need to work together. This next part, where it's appropriately high and challenging expectation of what a year's growth for a year's input should look like, is really essential. I feel like over time, and specifically over the last year, year and a half, our bar has lowered for what we feel like our student expectations are, and it shouldn't. Right? We always need to make sure that that bar is high, because if year after year we start to lower it little by little by little, then we are not necessarily keeping those goals for students at the level in which they need to be. So the collective teacher efficacy, where they're working together and making sure that those goals are high, is what has the most impact on student learning. So that feeds into also now what the 6 components of successful teams are. In our first webinar, we went into each one of these particular areas, and we talked about what each one of these areas means. We already went through the norms and climate, and we want consistent protocols. We want a clear communication plan. Today, we're going to talk about those shared and articulated and measurable goals, and an accountability process, so everybody is accountable. We're all part of student learning, and we all have our piece of what we need to do for student learning, and looking at timelines. So what happens in a PLC cycle? We talk about these cycles of PLC. So we're going to start with that highly effective research-based core instruction. We're going to systematically identify students who are not succeeding in that core program, and we're going to provide these students with additional time and support until they master those targets. This is just, it's a pretty busy graphic, but I like the way that it shows. We teach new content, we assess new learning, we review data, right? Students are ready to move on. If not, we discuss instructional ideas again and we reteach. If they are ready to move on, we again discuss instructional ideas and extend or teach new content, right? So these cycles are going to be going through periodically throughout the year. But the whole key is where this red portion is as well, is if your students aren't meeting those goals, what are you going to do? We're not just going to move on, we're going to be able to really start looking at what do we do for those students who aren't getting it. If there's a large amount of them, you need to redo the whole thing, right? But if there's a smaller amount, what are we going to do to get those kids where they need to be? So what's happening? We're gonna looking at identifying essential learning targets. A lot of our schools have done this work, and you are teaching every standard, but you have those standards which are really, you have to master those standards before moving on. So we have that information. We're going to look at data. We're going to review data, again determine which students need reteaching and who might need enrichment. We're going to talk about our students and figure out what instructional strategies are working for some or not for others. We're going to brainstorm how we can reach those kids that we may not have been able to reach yet, and we're going to plan for our instruction. And then the big thing is we're going to reflect, celebrate, and document everything that we're doing in these cycles. So that's an overview of PLC. I just want to pause there for a second and make sure we don't have any questions before I start moving on to our next section, which is understanding our standards.
So no questions so far, Heather.
Okay, perfect. All right, so understanding the standards. There's lots of different ways that we can look at our standards. The standards that we're looking at are, we obviously have ELA standards, K to 12 math. And then there's also these literacy and history and social studies, science and technical subjects standards for grades 6 through 12, and then your standards for science. Where we get those standards is the New Hampshire has adopted the Common Core standards. So most of our districts are looking directly at the Common Core standards. There are some districts who have taken those standards and tweaked them just a little bit or added additional standards in, but for the most part, everything in the state of New Hampshire is based on the Common Core. And we're also looking at the next generation science standards. When we talk about how the standards are structured, we have subjects, we have reporting categories or domains, clusters, and standards. So I just want to explain this a little bit. For some of you, this might be like, I get it, I already know, I look at the standards all the time, but I look at the standards all the time and I still sometimes have to remind myself of exactly how I'm reading them. I'm a huge math person. And so when I start looking at writing standards, I have to remind myself, okay, this is the way that they're set up and this is how they are. So we're going to start first. Our subjects are math, ELA, science. We're going to look at some reporting categories and domains. So some examples for math, this just happens to be 5th grade math. And the reporting categories and domains are what's listed in this gray portion. So if you download the Common Core standards, you have each sort of, we call them domains of math. I put reporting categories there because when we talk about New Hampshire SAS summative assessments, some of the domains are together. So I wanted to put that terminology on here, but you have your regular domains here for math. You've got the same reporting categories or domains for ELA. The difference is with math, each grade level has, they change for the grade levels, but for ELA, they tend to be K to 5, and then they're 6 to 12 as well. So they don't switch as often, but we're looking at reading standards for literature, reading standards for informational text. You've got writing, you've got speaking and listening. So those are your domains or categories of ELA. The literacy and history, social studies, science, and technical studies, they're similar. The domains are listed here for reading standards for literacy in history and social studies, or reading standards for literacy in science and technical subjects. So those are the reporting categories for that. And then for science, your reporting categories are physical, life, and earth science. As we move on from there, we have what are called clusters and then standards. So if we're looking at math, and I'm just looking right now at operations and algebraic thinking, that's my domain or my reporting category is operations and algebraic thinking, but my clusters are write and interpret numerical expressions, analyze patterns and relationships. So those are sort of subtopics within operations and algebraic thinking. And they tend to have one or more standards underneath them. So they've got your standards individually listed underneath them. So if we were looking at a standard and we were looking at 50A1, 50A1 is this particular standard here, 50A2, 50A3. Okay. All right. Same thing for ELA. We've got right now just looking at reading standards for literature. We've got our clusters. So that's key ideas and details or craft and structure. And then underneath each one of those, you have specific standards. All right. So if you were looking at grade 3, right, you would be looking at RL. So reading standards for literature, and it might be .1 or .2, .3. So that's how you read those. And then same thing again for your social studies, science, and technical studies. And you can see key ideas and details or craft and structure, and then you can see what the standards are there. All right, for science, within your clusters, you have maybe your physical science, and then you have matter and its interactions, motion and stability. These tend to be your disciplinary core ideas. And then within that, you have a lot of different like cross-cutting skills and all of those particular standards that you need to cover underneath those. I'm not sure why this says history. So if we're talking about the reading anchor standards, Jenny has put a nice slide together here that talks about what each particular area is for reading. So you've got key ideas and details, you've got craft and structure, integration of knowledge as an ideas and range of reading and text complexity. And then your writing anchor standards, you have text types and purposes, production and distribution of writing, research to build and present knowledge, and range of writing. And then for math, Annie has put together here, there are these key math cutting concepts for each grade level. So she has said for these grade spans or these grade levels, these are some of the key math concepts at each level. So it's always good to know about where they're kind of coming from and what is really those key concepts at your particular grade level. And then when we're talking about math, there is a website that's called Achieve the Core, and that's what this particular progression is for math. This happens to be a grade 1. These progressions on Achieve the Core are algebra progressions. So I just need to tell you that their end goal for Achieve the Core is algebra. It tends to be, if you're a 7th or 8th grade teacher, you know that they need to really, their end game for you to get them into high school and be where they need to be is algebra. So Achieve the Core are folks that are really well versed in the Common Core and that are teachers or in schools that have basically gone through each grade level, and they have figured out what the major clusters of standards are, the supporting clusters, and the additional clusters. So each grade level, you can see they have them, basically it's just K to 8, but you can see at each grade level what your major supporting and additional clusters are. They also highlight the major work of each grade level and show your required fluencies. And then on the back of each one of these documents is this progression so that you can see where kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade goes for where their sort of skill sets need to be at each grade level. And this was a game changer for us when we went into the whole COVID protocol a couple of years ago, to know, like, if we're not being able to get to everything, if we really want to focus on what has to be done in our grade level, it was really helpful for us to know what those major clusters of standards needed to be able to get students where they need to go. Not that we didn't teach some of the supporting or additional clusters, but we weren't going to spend a lot of time on those. For the literacy and history and social studies, just so you know, these standards are located in the writing Common Core standards. They're pretty far in, I would say. So if you teach grades 6 through 12, they are, I believe they're after the traditional writing standards, but they're listed right in the Common Core writing standards. And then these are the literacy and science and technical subjects. This is the page that they have for the grade spans for the writing within science and technical. And then all of us know, or science teachers know obviously about the Next Generation Science Standards site. And I know that the information in there, there's so much information. For some reason, for me, it's a little bit hard for me to navigate. Melissa White with the Department of Education pointed us in the direction of this nsta.org site. And for some reason, it just made more sense to me. So this particular site has everything broken out into the different domains of science. And then you're able to click on any one of these areas and it will open up what that particular area is and what all of the standards are for that. So I just want to go to this just really quickly. So if I'm going to go middle because we'll just go into middle grade here. So for middle school, you have all of these topics that you have. But if I was looking at natural selection and adaptations, I'm able to go in here. I can see my performance expectations and I can click on any of these. I can see my science and engineering practices, my disciplinary core ideas, and any cross-cutting subjects or concepts that there are. And it just continues with some planning and some other connections you can make. But every single one of these is a hyperlink to another page. So I just felt it was really easy and well designed. So You science folks probably already know about that, but it was something that I was really excited about. So next here, another way to look at our standards and to really understand our standards for grades 3 through 8, the New Hampshire SAS portal has what are called performance level descriptors, or PLDs. They're located in the resource area of that Cambium portal, which is that New Hampshire portal, cambianask.com. They're rubrics that align to the Common Core and NGSS standards, and they outline each level of proficiency for a specific standard. And they're for ELA, math, and science. So I'm just going to show you some of the examples. So again, you're on this New Hampshire SAS portal, and you click on resources, and you can type in PLDs, or performance level descriptors. You'll download it to your computer, and then you'll open up whichever grade level you're looking at. This is grade 3 language arts, and you can see along the left-hand side here that there are specific standards listed, and then it shows you what students are doing at each level of proficiency for that particular standard. I actually look at this all the time to make sure that I'm really interpreting what a standard is for a particular grade level. And especially when we're going to get into creating SMART goals, looking at what we want students to be doing and how proficient we want them to be. I look at these two columns a lot to see where do we want students to go for our SMART goals. So this is an example of ELA. Here's a math example. It's set up the same way. Again, here is 7th grade math. Here are your standards going along the left-hand side here, and this is what students are doing at each level of proficiency for that particular standard. Last one I did middle school science. Here are your topic areas here, and then what a level 2, 3, or 4 student is doing for that particular topic area. Also on the New Hampshire SAS portal, in that resource area, you have writing rubrics. So anybody who teaches writing, there are rubrics. There's grades 3 through 5, informative rubrics, and then there's also opinion writing rubrics. And then there's the same thing for grades 6 through 8. They have the explanatory and opinion writing rubrics as well. I point you in the direction of these, not so that you just ditch and throw away your current rubrics, because we don't want you doing that. Your rubrics are great, but what I want you to really start to think about is, do they include all of these particular skills? And if they don't, you might think about incorporating some of the skills so that you are making sure that you're covering everything that needs to be covered in the depth of knowledge students need to have to perform successfully on the New Hampshire SAS writing assessment. That assessment is 100% Common Core aligned. So I do find it really helpful to look at what sort of things students are needing to be doing to score a level 4, a 3, or a 2, or a 1. So here are just some general links and information to where you might be able to find information on your standards. One thing, I have a star here that I want to make sure that you're really thinking about is, when you're looking at your standards, always look at obviously your year, but you also want to look at the year before or the year after. I say this because you need to know where students are coming from, and you need to know where they're going to, for more than one reason. Right. So we need to know that so that we can know when we're teaching students where they're coming from and where they're going. But more importantly, you also want to make sure that you are not asking something of the grade level before you that isn't one of their standards. I find this all the time. Every school I go into and every school I've ever worked in, teachers in the grade level above wherever you're teaching always say, well, the kids aren't where they need to be when they're coming into my classroom, and you haven't taught them this, and you need to make sure you cover this. And none of us want to feel that way, right? We all do the best we can. We all are covering everything that we can. in our curriculum. But what I find is a lot of times teachers are asking in a grade level above for those, let's say you teach grade 4, you're asking teachers in grade 3 to really start helping and making sure kids are where they need to be for maybe what's a 4th grade standard, right? So if a 4th grade teacher is asking you and making sure and saying they're coming in and they don't know anything about really using, the long division, or an algorithm for that, it's not a 3rd grade standard. So 4th grade teachers need to know that, right? So looking at that grade level before we start saying you didn't get them where they needed to be, make sure you know what those standards are, right? And make sure you know when they're covered in the grade spans. With math specifically, a lot of what's taught in math goes in a 3-year cycle. I'm going to credit Annie Wallace, who's on this particular webinar on this, because she helped me understand that they tend to go in 3-year spans. So a math concept might be introduced in 1 grade, but then it's worked on in the next grade and it's solidified in the grade after that. So you want to know where you are in that continuum of what skills maybe need to be solidified or what you're just working on during that particular time frame. So make sure you know where they're coming from, where they're going to, and what you need. Any questions there?
No questions.
All right. Okay, we'll move on there. Okay, so now we understand our standards, and we're going to talk about articulating SMART goals today. I will say that our next webinar, we're really going to get into the data dive process and doing an actual data dive on a specific piece of data and what it means to do an actual data dive. We're going to be creating SMART goals today, and you just kind of have to bear with me. I am going to show you some data and we're going to create SMART goals off of that data. But I will tell you, I'm feeling like it's a little bit, I wanted I would have done a data dive before doing SMART goals because a lot of times we need to look at that data. But we're going to talk about SMART goals today, and then we're going to really do the data dive and talk about that data-driven dialogue process and how you do that effectively. That'll be in the next particular webinar. So I'm going to go over looking at the data a little bit quickly today so we can just really talk about how we create SMART goals. So articulating SMART goals. We all have heard it, right? But SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, right? The big part of this that I find that people struggle with the most is that measurable. How do we measure this, right? We don't just say students are going to improve, right? Well, how are we measuring that? Improve by how much, right? What does improvement mean? So we need to make sure it's measurable. So we're going to talk a lot about how to do that here. When we're talking about articulating SMART goals, there's a lot of different ways that you can do SMART goals. The way that I really like to work with SMART goals in schools is we're looking at that year-long goal, right? So we have a year-long goal where we want students to be at the end of the year. A lot of our schools, it's mandatory, right? Sometimes they're called SMART goals, and sometimes they're SLOs or student learning objectives. There's a lot of different acronyms for them, but a lot of schools are saying that each teacher needs to figure out for students what goal they're going to have for this year, where kids are starting and where we want them to be at the end of the year. But also within that, you want to make sure that you're looking at specific cycles of learning to make sure you get to that year-end goal, right? So I can say in the school that I worked in for quite some time, we were really good at doing that year-long SMART goal. And it's not that we didn't think about it again throughout the year, but we didn't have specific cycles that we went through to ensure that we were meeting that goal. We were just hoping it was going to happen. We were really concentrating on writing, or we were really concentrating on a specific, math concept. But So I'm going to go through how you might create a year-long SMART goal, and then I'll show you how I would also then create a cycle SMART goal for that particular subject matter. So when we talk about year-long SMART goals, there is a year-long goal template that is in the materials that you'll be getting in an email. Though Elizabeth Dion will send out an email tomorrow. It's usually about 24 hours later, and it will give you access to a folder that will have some of these templates in it. It also has the Common Core standards for each grade level and those performance level descriptors. So you'll have that. But this is one of the templates that we have to establish year-long goals. And it basically walks you through the process of what you would do as a team to be able to create a year-long goal. And then it helps you with understanding some of the terminology and what you might be able to do for that particular goal. So where do you start? How do I start creating this year-long SMART goal? Right? This is really the reality. We have so much data. What are we going to use? Right? So we look at that. We do need to look at data. We do need to look at our standards. We need to look at what our power standards are, right? We want to make sure that whatever we're doing for a year-long goal isn't one of the supplemental standards that we have, but it's really one of the big standards that we need to cover. We don't want to spend a lot of time on it if it's something that's not necessarily one of the priorities for our particular grade level. And then we're going to have teacher input on what that means to be able to get students to where they need to be. So again, we're going to start with data. What type of data do you have, right? We have all these different types of data. So what do we want to use? Today, for the year-long SMART goal, we are going to be looking at specific data, but this is the type of data that you may have. So sometimes you have previous student data, right? This is one particular student and how they scored over time and throughout their time in school. So you can see it starts with 4th grade, then we go to 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. This particular data can be good to look at because you'll see the student in 4th grade was doing pretty well. 5th grade, holding their own, well, and then 6th grade, something's happened, right? So this data can be good to look at to say, wow, like this student is lower, but they weren't before. So what's happening or what's going on? So sometimes this data is good to look at. Sometimes you're looking at the beginning of the year data or current data. This happens to be New Hampshire SAS modular data. And you might be looking at all your students in your class and how they scored on a specific assessment. I feel like this data is what teachers look at the most, is their particular class right now and how they're scoring right now. The last type of data that you might look at is historical data. This happens to be 3-year New Hampshire SAS summative data for grade 5. And so what this is this shows you how students are performing on a specific skill or cluster of standards over time. When I'm looking at year-long SMART goals, I do like to look at historical data, but you don't always have to look at historical data. You have grade levels in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, or you might have high school levels. You don't necessarily have these, New Hampshire SAS summative data. You might be looking at NEWA, you might be looking at iReady, you might be looking at, an end of the year assessment, and you could look at historical data. It's not always the way you do year-long SMART goals, but this is the example that I'm using today. So why I like historical data. Historical data allows you to look at curriculum effectiveness. So it's not just this group of students, it's students over time, right? So you're looking at the grade as a whole, and you're not chasing necessarily 1 or 2 students. And so you're seeing, 5th grade for 3 years straight, or roughly 3 years straight, how they're producing and what you might be seeing as overall trends for strengths and weaknesses over multiple years. And then you can focus on a group of standards that might be traditionally low and make instructional changes to make a large impact. So if you see over 3 years that you're traditionally low in a specific cluster of standards, that doesn't have to do with a specific group of kids. That's 3 years in a row with different kids in your grade level, that means there's either something in your curriculum or something in the way that you're teaching it that isn't getting kids to that specific depth of knowledge needed to be able to meet the expectations at that grade level. And maybe there's a little part of the standard you're missing, or maybe it's just we're not teaching it in this particular way. So it helps you really hone in on what you might need to change in your teaching.
Heather, can I
Yeah.
interrupt just a second with a question?
Mhm.
We have a question from a high school teacher who's asking, what type of data should high school teachers be using in this process?
Well, it depends on what your content area is, right? Each content area has probably specific, assessments that they might do year after year after year. So if you're looking at those assessments and you're saying, okay, I'm looking at kids that were in my class 3 years ago, last year and this year and how they're scoring, I'm seeing over time, this particular assessment is the kids are weak in a particular area. We also have a lot of, I haven't talked about it very much here, but we have a lot of high schools are working on competencies and competency-based learning. So taking a look at your competencies and whatever you're doing for assessments for those, or whatever project-based learning that you're seeing, okay, here's the rubric that I'm using. This particular competency is low every single year. So what do I need to do to be able to beef up that competency for this? I know also that a lot of high school teachers use like a PSAT data or, historical SAT data to see where their particular grade level fits into the skills that kids in their school might traditionally be low in. And so I know that a lot of people use the College Board website to be able to pull that information out. So hopefully if that doesn't answer it, let me know and I'll see if I can provide you with more information on that. So as we're looking at data, we're going to go through this particular data-driven dialogue in our next webinar to show you how to do an actual data dive. But I just wanted to put it here to say that as we're looking at data, we're doing a lot of predicting, we're doing observation, we're interpreting that data. Why do we think it looks that way? Or what's happening with that? We're looking specifically, phase 4 is huge. What are the implications for our practice and our teaching? What are we going to change? What are our next steps? And then we're going to reflect on the process. And then we're going to reassess and see how students are doing. So in doing that, if we're looking at 3-year data, so I'm creating a year-long SMART goal here. What does the data tell us, right? What are we looking at? If we're looking at here, our reporting category right now is operations and algebraic thinking, right? I'm looking at this and I'm saying, whoa, here is red across the board, doesn't matter. This is actual data. I didn't make this up, just so you know, it's test data, but it is an actual site. So this particular school is having a really hard time with the cluster of standards under operations and algebraic thinking that's write and interpret numerical expressions, right? That's what the data is telling me. If I'm looking at that same data and I'm looking at numbers and operations and base 10 and fractions, I'm looking here and I'm saying, wow, there's a lot of red in here. We seem to be doing okay. It was kind of, pretty average or below standard. Now we're looking, this is all an area of weakness for the last couple of times they took the New Hampshire SAS summative assessments. I'm going to look at this particular cluster of standards, which is perform operations with multi-digit whole numbers with decimals, right? And what I have here is I also have information about like how many points it is. So it's 3 to 5 points. The one before this is 5 to 9 points. I'm looking at all of these. This is one set of data, right? And I'm thinking about where am I going to change my teaching and be able to make the most gains and the most of my teaching, right? I want to get my students to really where they need to be. So these are my possible areas of focus now. I can look at operations and algebraic thinking or numbers and operations base 10 and fractions. So this just happens to be a base 10 one. And I can say, well, this looks like it's a major standard, right? Our our New Hampshire SAS Summative Assessment is directly correlated with the major standards within the Achieve the Core as well. There's a couple of discrepancies, but for the most part, the number of points matches. And you can say on the outset, it might be like, wow, I'm going to get more sort of mileage out of really focusing in on these particular standards for the year. But if I'm a fifth grade teacher, I might also know that this particular cluster of standards, when we're talking about performing operations with multi-digit whole numbers and decimals, actually goes across a whole bunch of standards in fifth grade. So I might choose this one here because I know that that particular standard can be inserted in a lot of the units that I'm teaching in fifth grade math. So as we go here, I want to pick a specific cluster. So for me, I'm going to pick this perform operations with multi-digit whole numbers and decimals. I'm pulling that information out and I'm saying, okay, let's take a look at this now. I want to look at my standards, right? What in the world is standard 5, 6, and 7? So I've got this. Here's my cluster of standards under operations and numbers and operations base 10. And this cluster has these particular standards in it. So I want to make sure that I'm really understanding what those standards are. So I'm going to dig into those standards a little bit. All right. And then I'm going to create my SMART goals. So this particular goal worksheet is in your supplemental materials that you'll be getting tomorrow. And this just walks us through each particular part of the process in creating a SMART goal. So I'm going to go through each one and show you what I would do. This particular data here, I just put it down on the bottom so that you can see here. So write the goal I have in mind. So students will improve the problem solving skills within operations and algebraic thinking domain, right? That's my initial goal. I want to be specific. Students will perform operations with multi-digit whole numbers with decimals. That's what my cluster of standards is, right? How am I going to measure this? So we're going to make an assessment. We're going to administer it before the start of the fraction units and at the end of the fraction units at the end of the year and at the end of the year. So this we're going to do some maybe pre-assessments, some post-assessments, and we're going to take a peek and try to do this periodically throughout the year. The achievable part. Can our students do this? Can we do this? I will tell you, this is the answer every time. Right? If it's not, then let's not do a SMART goal for it. If it's something that you feel like you cannot necessarily get kids to a different level with, then pick something that you really can move kids on, right? And if you're not able to do that, why? Why are you not able to do it? Do you need to tap into new resources? Is it because your particular curriculum doesn't really cover that very well? And if it doesn't, what can you do to change that? So again, I wouldn't necessarily change your SMART goal. Your answer should be yes. You have to believe that you are going to be able to get your students where they need to be with this goal. And then is it relevant? Yes, it's a major Common Core math cluster and your students need to be successful with it. Right? If it's not, then don't do it. Right? And time bound. When is it going to be happening? We're going to say by the end of this year, because this is our year-long SMART goal, this is where we're going to get students. So with this, we're going to start to think about articulating a SMART goal, right? So we have that whole worksheet filled out, but what in the world is our SMART goal going to be? This little template here shows you a way that you can just kind of fill in the information so that you can articulate that SMART goal. You have to bear with me. It's going to be a little bit wordy here. So here would be my SMART goal for this. So by June of 2022, our fifth grade students will be able to perform operations with multi-digit whole numbers with decimals as demonstrated by improving from being a below the proficiency standard and an area of weakness to above the proficiency standard and an area of strength on the New Hampshire SAS 2021-2022 summative assessment. It's a mouthful. Part of the reason it's a mouthful is because our New Hampshire SAS summatives aren't quantitative. They don't have like, oh, 80% of our students are proficient or higher in this particular area. So it's pretty wordy. When we start getting into the SMART that I'm going to do for one of the cycles, you'll see that the language can be a little bit more precise when you do have percentages. But this is what you can follow to be able to create any year-long SMART goals. It is the same process I'm going to show you for sort of that first cycle. So I just want to pause really quickly here, Lauren, and see if there's any questions about what I've said so far.
So there was a question regarding the data, wondering if the data has to be standardized for these goals.
It does not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be nationally alarmed or standardized. You don't have to use NEWA or iReady or DIBELS or anything like that. If you have a specific assessment that you do in your subject area or your grade, and there's a beginning of the year assessment that matches an end of the year assessment, you just want to make sure that when you're creating SMART goals, you're going off of data that will then be the same data that you're looking at later in the year so you can see improvement, right? So a lot of people do end up using standardized tests because it is something that they give in the beginning, middle, and end of the year so they can see that growth. So what I would say is if you have a SMART goal and you want students to improve on a specific area of math and their assessment that you gave at the beginning of the year, you created a SMART goal and said you wanted them to improve to 80% of proficiency for whatever, the assessment needs to be the same at the end of the year. It can't be a different assessment, if that makes sense. All right. Anything else before I move on?
That was it.
Okay. All right. The last thing for the year-long SMART goal is we have this action step development template. This just gets you thinking about what is your current situation, right? Where your students are at right now. And then what's your year-long SMART goal? And then any sort of strategies and action steps that you might need to do to be able to reach that goal at the end of the year. So you're going to focus on this maybe for 3 cycles of PLC. Maybe you need another adult to be able to help work with your team and do intervention. Maybe you need to revise your curriculum. What do we need to add to our curriculum, or what do we need to tweak to be able to do that? Maybe we need to look at our scope and sequence and figure out where is this standard hit throughout the year and make sure that when it is hit, we are really hitting it hard and doing everything we can to get kids to be really proficient and having that depth of knowledge that's needed. So like I said, that's how we would do a year-long SMART goal. That's one of the processes that I have, is looking at historical data. Again, it doesn't have to be, but I find it really useful to look at historical data that way. I will tell you right now, I'm working with a school and we're working on writing, and we're working with grade levels that haven't necessarily had a lot of writing rubrics in the past, or something to look at historically. And so we're using beginning of the year data to create a year-long SMART goal, and then we're figuring out our cycles from there. So again, it doesn't have to be historical, but it is helpful to have historical data. Right now, what I want to show you is the process of, okay, I have my year-long SMART goal, and now I'm looking at just a single cycle goal. You're going to see that this process is exactly the same, but I wanted to go through it just to make sure that you understand it for a specific cycle as well, but everything's going to look very familiar to you. The difference is I am going to, for a specific cycle, I am going to look at current student data. This is a pre-assessment that was done. It happens to be a grade 5 math modular assessment. It has to do with the domain of math that was one that we're looking at for our year-long goal. And so this is my pre-assessment data here, right? What I want to do is figure out, what does this data tell me, right? What does it tell you? All right, I've got my student names along the left-hand side. Here are my levels of proficiency for each student, right? This is my, what percentage did they get correct out of the 10 questions on this modular assessment. And then I've got it mapped to my standards here. And here is my correct answer frequency. So I can look for every single question. I can see this is how students performed on these particular questions, right? So as I'm looking at this, I'm going to look at possible areas of focus. I'm going to look at these standards, right? And as I'm looking at these standards, I'm starting to look at some trends on what particular standards might look like, right? And so now I'm looking at, okay, these particular 2 questions on this particular modular assessment are really low, right? So what does that mean? What is NB2? What is 5 NBT6, right? And so then I'm just going to start looking at what are the standards that have to do with those particular, what are they? What are we talking about here? So I'm looking at the numbers in operations base 10. I'm looking at 2. So this is the standard for the second one. And this is MBT 6. And I'm looking at the standard for this. Turns out my standard for this, which is low here, is in that same area and cluster of standards that is my year-long goal. Makes sense, right? But now I'm looking at this too. And so I can see the standards that it's attached to, but I want to see what questions, what they looked like. Just looking at the standards is not always going to be super helpful to me. It is because I need to know the standards, but I also want to say, well, look at this. This is MBT 6, and so is this one. Wow, this one was 89% accuracy, and this was 26. So I want to look at the specific question. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is I am going to look at the questions. So my MBT2 question is this, and my MBT 6 question, that the ones that students scored really poorly on, was this, right? So I've got no pictures, I've got nothing. So if I'm really starting to look at, if I'm drawing things out, I have no drawings available to me specifically for this NBT 6, right? I also might look at what NBT 6 for question 8 was, so I can see what the difference was, so I can really hone in my thinking, right, and my teaching. Because I see such a discrepancy here, I'm going to focus on NBT 6, and because it's also really hitting that year-long SMART goal. So as I start, here's the same goal worksheet that I have. And now I'm going to write my goal for this particular standard. So students will improve problem-solving skills in relation to 5 MBT 6. So students will find whole number quotients of whole numbers up to 4-digit dividends and 2-digit divisors in context. So that's pulled straight from that standard. I have to be honest with you, that's pulled straight from the PLDs that are for grade 5 math, right? So I was looking at the proficient or above and what they're doing. So that was a guide for me for this. And then measurable. Okay, well, we're going to administer and create exit tickets related to this standard. So I might have a problem of the day and I want them to give me an exit ticket at the end of the day and solve this problem. And I'm also going to have them retake that New Hampshire SAS modular assessment again. All right, I'm going to see how they're doing on that particular skill. Is it achievable? Again, this is always the answer. And then is it relevant? Yes. Again, it's a major math clusters and your students need to be successful with it. And I'm going to, now my time bound is by the end of our unit 3 math curriculum, right? So at the end of this next unit that I'm teaching or the unit that I'm going to be finishing up, I'm going to give that assessment again. Here is the exact same template. And here now is my SMART goal for this. By December of 2021, because that's when I'm finishing that unit, our 5th grade students will be able to find whole digit quotients of whole digit numbers with up to 4-digit dividends and 2-digit divisors in context, as demonstrated by improving to at least 90% correct answer frequency related to NBT 6 questions on the New Hampshire SAS modular assessment. So I'm wanting this 26% to go up to 90%. I chose 90% because, man, my kids were already at 89% for the other question. So I want to get them up to that particular level for this question as well. For our cycle SMART goals, there's a worksheet that you'll also have in the handouts. Again, current situation, what the cycle SMART goal is, but then this is like putting in a little bit different information. What are my student groupings going to be? Am I going to assign adults to those groups, or who is going to be teaching which students? We need to make sure we're planning our lessons, gathering up materials, reteaching when needed, all of these things. I'm going to post assess. When are we going to do that? And when's it going to be done by? This is those defined timelines. When are we going to have all of these things done and who's responsible for them? Any questions on that?
We don't have any questions, Heather.
Okay. So we're pretty much wrapping up what our topics are for today. So I just want to move through here. If you have any questions or want to put anything in, please put them into that Q&A section so that we can answer them before the end. But I do have a couple of slides I want to get through, and then I can stay on for a couple minutes if needed. Our PLC webinar series continues with creating pre-assessments and that data dive cycle, and really digging into how do we get into the data, how do we look at it, and what we're doing to be able to make sure that we're looking at it in a really smart and concise way. That's coming up November 9th. And then we're continuing November 30th with looking at needs and implementing tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 types of interventions. And then December 9th, we're finishing up with any sort of progress monitoring, post-assessing, and celebrating. In addition, we have completed all of our understanding standards and depth of knowledge webinars, with the exception of our grades 9 through 12 span, which is next week on November 3rd. If you are looking for K to 2, 3 to 5, or 6 to 8, those particular webinars were recorded and you can view them. They are available on the Demonstrated Success YouTube page, and they're also on the Department of Education's page as well. So you can check those out for the recordings. As you leave this webinar today, there's going to be a survey that pops up, and we love your feedback. Always good to know how we can improve our webinars. And I really do take that. I look at the information every time I share it with our Department of Education contacts. So we are always really looking to improve and make sure we're meeting the needs of all of the folks that are spending their time with us. And here's our contact information. Again, I'm Heather Jenkins. We have Lauren Mercier, also from Demonstrated Success, and then Annie Wallace is your math person from the DOE, and Jenny Cavallari is your ELA person.
Great. Heather, we did actually have one more question come in.
Great.
Wondering, somebody on the call is wondering where folks can find the SAS modulars.
They are on the portal. I'm gonna escape out of here and I'll show you.
Great, thank you.
So I'm going to add here. So this is that New Hampshire portal, cambamass.com. I'm going to take this and I'm going to actually put it in the chat to everyone, just in case you need it. If you Google New Hampshire SAS, it's the first thing that comes up. So you should be all set there. The modulars are in the test administration area. So you're going to click on test administration, and then you can view them. So you can scroll through the questions in what's called the assessment viewing application. You have to log in to be able to do this. So you need a login to the portal. So if you're somebody that administers the assessments, the summatives, you already have a login. You might need a new one for this year. In addition, before you can view them, you have to do the test administration certification. It's what we do every school year. So even though you might have taken it in the spring, it's a new school year now. You have to take this test administration certification before you have access to it. It takes about 30 minutes. It runs through the same questions. It hasn't changed. And you answer the questions, and then you'll be able to gain access to it. But you do have to do this first. So as I'm here, I'm just going to log in. And then the modular assessments, the way that they are sort of put together is each grade level, you're able to choose which modulars you want. So each grade level has math and ELA, and then you have science in grade 5, 8, and 11. So what you need to know as grade 3 and 4 teachers is you have science topics that you teach that are listed in the 5th grade modulars. So if you want to see the science modulars, you have to look at 5th grade. It's pretty clear what you have for the modulars. I'm going to show you 5th grade because it's easy. Here's the ELA modulars. Here's the math. Here are the science modulars, and you can see the grade level where it says 4- here, that's a 4th grade next generation science topic. This one's a 5th grade, a 3rd grade, a 3rd grade. So this is where you can view them. So if I wanted to go into, oh, I shouldn't have done that one. Darn. I don't want to have to go through the ding, 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 ding. It'll have you go through like testing your microphone and everything like that. So I'm going to go down and go here. And what you can do is you can scroll through each one of the questions so you can know what the questions are. And then if you want to administer these particular assessments, you would go same thing. You're on this New Hampshire portal, cambamass.com under test administration. And you're going to the administering tests and you can administer them the same way you administer the summatives. There's a few options there. I won't get too much into that. If you need any help administering, definitely reach out to me. I can Zoom with you really quickly and show you some different ways to do it.
Heather, there was a follow-up to that.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if Annie is responding, but as an interventionist, they don't have access to the SAS login. They need to maybe talk to their administrators to be able to get access. I do not ever recommend using somebody else's login. I've had a couple of people tell me like, oh, I did the modular. I didn't take the test administration certification. So I just use another person's. Don't do that, please. Just go to your administrator. You have a person who's an I4C coordinator, and they should be able to add you to TIDE so that you can be able to give modular assessments to your students. Thanks, Heather.
All right, I'm going to hang on for another couple seconds just to make sure we don't have any last minute questions. I appreciate people hanging on for this long. All right. I think that will wrap it up. I appreciate again, I know your time is valuable, and for everybody who is on this webinar today, hopefully we'll see you at the next one.